Welcome back to Taking Stock with Koble. I'm Deke Bowman, head of product here at Koble Systems, where we help individuals and organizations flourish by putting ERP software to work. Today, I'm sitting with Melvin Lambright. Melvin is an implementation consultant here at Koble, where he walks with clients through their implementation process of ERP. He consults with clients and retainers, helping them transition between different stages of growth in their company where they need new tooling or new process. Melvin even trained me as well as many of our staff and many of our clients through the years during his tenure here at Koble Systems. Welcome to the show, Melvin.
Thank you. Thank you, Deke. Good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a fun twist in the plot of our work relationship. I feel like you're the one who often had the blessing or curse of me trying to learn something fast and on the fly, maybe even getting myself in trouble, and me going, "Oh, Melvin, what do I do now?" Or, "Oh, Melvin, what did I do?"
Nothing but blessing, Deke. Nothing but blessing. Yes, sir. Many good memories already working with you. It's been a great joy and quite the honor to see you, onboarding here at Koble and then just stepping through the various roles that you did and landing where you are now. It's exciting. Yes.
Yeah, it's fun. All right. Well, today our topic is all around implementation. So you are one of our key consultants who walk customers through that process. And sometimes it's complicated, sometimes it's pretty straightforward. And I think the challenge is just understanding what it looks like to get into that. So can you tell me a little about yourself, about your
Mhm.
role, and what excites you when you show up for work every day?
Yeah. Yeah. So I live in the Midwest. I am married. It's getting close to 10 years. Next year, it'll be 10 years. I've got three children. Oldest is 6. My daughter is 6. I have a son who's 4, and then another second son who's just turned 1. So I think, in life generally, I think my greatest joy is being a husband and a dad. But as far as work and what brings me the most joy at work, this sounds like a cliche, but what really brings me joy is seeing clients. For example, a client who is perhaps coming from a place of disorganization or where processes across their company are a bit scattered or in a place of needing some unification or some guidance. Sometimes there's cases where clients are using multiple tools and doing multiple entries of a similar nature in
Yeah.
different tools and being able to replace that with, for example, one tool, one step, and seeing organizations come through that and come to a place at the end where there is greater clarity, greater
Mhm.
simplicity, the ability to pull a report that they need in real time.
Mhm.
These things, can sometimes sound cliche and simple, but they are sometimes revolutionary for our
Mhm.
clients. And when we are able to be part of that with a client, that just thrills me. I love to see that.
That's amazing. And it's tantamount to our conversation today. So we're going to focus on
Mhm.
implementation. You do that so well. And again, I'm one of the one who's received the gift of your training and tutelage. It's a common question I'm asking many of our guests on the podcast is, why do people dive into a system? What brings businesses to ERP? Why do you encounter customers? Like when you're starting the implementation process, what's making them go, yeah, I need this in my corporate life, so to speak?
Sure. Great question with a variety of good answers to it. One can be that a business, an organization maybe outgrows the tool that or tool set of tools that they were using. Maybe it's a case where a business is fairly satisfied with the tools that they have, but if they think to future growth, they might get uncomfortable thinking about their current systems in 5 years or 10 years.
Hmm.
The other thing that is fairly common, more common than not, is where organizations have tools that the tool just doesn't quite reach, or maybe they have to
Hmm.
use several tools to manage the business. Or I have even seen at times where the tools they have may be capable, but were not really ever understood very well or fully implemented.
Yeah.
And to introduce an ERP or another system that is both capable of growth and capable of handling all facets of the business brings this opportunity for the organization to hit a big reset button and to not only, hopefully bring better tools into their organization, but to also maybe bring into their ecosystem the ability to pivot away from something that they're struggling to use well and hopefully get to a better place. So there's more
Yeah.
answers that could be given. Those are top of
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah. That makes sense. Those are interesting because in many ways, it sounds like companies are either proactively seeing a space where they want to go or where their company's headed, and they know that what they're doing today won't serve them down the road. So they're
Correct.
getting ahead of the curve. But then there's also, I think, companies that get out over their skis a little bit. They
Yeah.
experience growth faster than they expect,
Oh, absolutely.
and then they're kind of like, "Oh no."
That's a good one, Dee. Yeah, and in cases like that, that can feel more stressful to, business owners or whoever is leading the charge, the decision making for another system. But yeah, in cases like that, definitely a system is needed that can handle all facets of the business. And one of the big things, a common thread that I have encountered over the years, there are others. Believe me, there's a variety, but one of the common threads often is inventory.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon that a business is struggling with the tools they have to manage their inventory or to have the insights at their fingertips that they need to know when to reorder and what to reorder, or
Mhm.
what they have on order, whatever the case may be. But, you know, it can be labor management, it can be
Right.
task management, it can be financials. There's other spectrums that lead people to the consideration of an ERP. But ERP, one thing, a quick plug on ERP. Think of your business as an enterprise, even if you are a small business with
Mhm.
maybe only a few staff members. But every enterprise has multiple facets to it. There's not just inventory. ERP, the idea of ERP is to be as all encompassing as possible across the entire organization, having the same system in use across the entire organization, and thereby having a single place to go for the truth of what's happening in the organization. That's my favorite part of ERP is bringing everyone together into the same
Mhm.
system and not having two places that the same information can be pulled from and the two systems being at odds with each other. So,
Not
yeah.
that's fantastic. So there's a couple of steps I want to explore, a couple of threads I want to pull into thinking about this, like why ERP and what to expect. But the first is, what are the misconceptions? What do you hear business owners going when they start the implementation? What are the expectations that they come in with? Or maybe it's after go live. What are the expectations that they have of the result of that might be misplaced? Do you have any stories or things that you'd want to call out that help frame what one would expect in embarking on an ERP implementation or using ERP in their business?
And it's going to be simple. It's not just that's not to scare anybody away from implementing ERP. But the most common misconception that I probably have encountered over the years is that it is easier or simpler or something down those lines than what it actually ends up being. I've also encountered where there's a lack of realization at the onset of the amount of time that may end up being invested by the lead person, both getting their arms around the new system and then implementing it across all the facets of the business. One of the things that is very helpful to an implementation, if the lead person already has a deep familiarity with as many aspects of the business as possible. Um, So misconceptions, to answer your question, I think the most common that I probably encounter is just the amount of time that can end up being invested in implementing an ERP. You can think of it this way. It's easy to walk in somewhere, whether
Mhm.
it's a new building or a business or a new park, something where you stop and you pause and you admire the finished product.
Right.
It's and not really think about and realize the work that went into
Mhm.
it to get it to where it is. Hopefully, I'm not scaring anyone with this. I'm simply trying to make the case it's good to plan, to be able to focus on the implementation and get your arms around it. I've even seen implementations fail where a lead person is not able to step away enough from their daily responsibilities in
Right.
order to get their arms around and learn this new system and then translate that to the organization's daily life and workflows. So that's where my head goes with that, Deke.
That's great.
That's great.
I mean, that also kind of informs some other of the threads that I want to pull on. And that's like, so it was around the big challenges companies face during an ERP implementation. And the other side of the equation is what should a company have in place? How do they set themselves up for success? And it seems like you started telling on both those, they're held in tension, right? Because the challenges sometimes are mitigatable with the right preparation, but it's often difficult to know what you need to prepare for because it's a new thing and everything's kind of different. So,
Yeah.
what advice would you have for a business owner who's embarking on the ERP exploration to know what challenges or bumps they might hit along the way, but also what they can do to prepare themselves and their company for that effort?
Where my head goes, this is a good question, by the way. Where my headspace goes is to the importance in the process of analyzing ERP and trying to figure out which one are we the right fit for or which one is the right fit for us. Where
Mhm.
my head goes in this particular process, this initial stage of assessment and analysis, is the importance of understanding your own business well enough that you bring to the table the things that you know are the core, maybe they're non-negotiable type
Mm,
requirements or workflows. And in this process, I really encourage clients to the degree that it makes sense from case to case to take seriously the analysis part of assessing ERPs to make sure that they pick the right product.
mhm.
And they ought to be able to either see demos or walk through demos. And it's okay to take this with a grain of salt, but don't just take someone's word on this is what our program offers and this is what it does.
Mm,
You're much better off as a client, as a prospective buyer, to own that and to, if possible, get your hands on the product and test it out or be walked through these critical workflows or these
mm.
these aspects of the business that are so critical and core to a program. I think of it a little bit this way, Deke. Maybe kind of a poor example, but you imagine going to the doctor and if the folks at the front after I've seen the doctor are unable to check me out unless or until the doctor has keyed in or provided the billing codes of what services he performed, in that case you would really want a program that the doctor maybe on the fly or in each room can key in what he did.
Mhm.
Otherwise, the person in the front's going to go chase down the doctor, or the doctor has to come up front. This is the kind of workflow stuff I'm talking about that are
Yes.
sometimes critical to businesses that decision makers aren't always aware of, depending on how big an organization is. If an organization is small, oftentimes that awareness is already in place.
Right.
But it's really key to know your business well if you are the decision maker of what program or ERP you are considering. and to take very seriously that analysis early on of
Mhm.
what each program does. There are large implementations that fail, not in the analysis part, but after work has begun, when discovery is made of those critical elements that were failed to be identified and scoped and addressed.
It's an interesting frame you're putting around because what you're ultimately saying is know your business, right? Familiarize yourself with all the steps.
Yes.
I also suspect there's a tension there, consulting with customers, that sometimes people have to reframe or reimagine their
Right.
process or you reimagine their business. So there's an art to the science. So it's not always a
Correct.
one-to-one, but there's some kind of a level of flexibility you have to identify in yourself when you're embarking on this kind of path.
This is a great point, Deke. I'm glad you brought it up. If the doctor's used to writing down the codes on a
Yeah.
piece of paper and the paper travels up front with the patient, and, you know, the goal in that case ought not to be to, you know, replace the piece of paper with another piece of paper. I
Right.
mean, it's fine to do that. But ultimately, if you can justify a device in the doctor's hand where he simply keys it in and it's instantaneously there when the patient walks up front and says, I am Melvin, I am finished, I'm checking out. And the person up front can just pull it up electronically and it's there. You
Right.
know, so you're exactly right. The ability to understand the business in depth and broadly, I'm here on one hand advocating for business leaders and decision makers to get into the weeds, to
Yep.
know the weeds of your business. At the same time, I am saying that it's also good not to live by and be bound by the weeds and to be able to take that step back and to, have the both insight, experience, authority, whatever is needed to
Right.
implement change and to see and understand the value and the purpose of the change. Because sometimes the changes don't benefit the person that is impacted most by the change, but it benefits the overall organization. That would be one arena of where my head goes about setting oneself or an organization up for
Mhm.
success for implementation. What you're touching on is the willingness
Mhm.
or adaptability of the leader, him or herself.
Yeah.
Um, the other arena that I think of with setting an organization up for success is to ensure buy-in. If it's not just a single decision maker, it's fairly important to ensure that, to the degree that's possible, everybody feel good with the decision and feel that the product selected, the ERP selected is the right fit. That will have downstream benefit to the entire organization. On other ways to set oneself up for success, I earlier touched on the time aspect,
Right.
being able to put time aside. The common thread of successful implementations, it is ownership.
Yep.
And it sounds so simple, but if the lead person responsible for the implementation approaches things with the attitude of being willing to do whatever it takes
Mhm.
to get this across the finish line, usually that single thing of ownership is what takes clients across the ERP implementation finish line.
Yeah. That tenacity, that extreme ownership
Yes.
of owning
Yes.
that regression's almost never the answer. So,
Correct. Yep. That's correct. It is certainly normal to delegate out, responsibilities. That happens in implementations, but there is a difference between delegating something out to get done versus delegating it out so I don't have to do it. There's a huge difference. So, yeah, just trying to get these things in place and the right people or person in the right seat at the onset is a huge, often overlooked aspect.
excellent. So, I think the other thing that comes up, a question that we'll always encounter is how much time does it take? What's the expectation? I've thought about this question a little bit. It anchors in those previous questions, right? So if you're prepared, if you have the right expectations, if you're open-minded to change your processes and adapt to new philosophies of doing a task or a workflow, then that often is helpful. But I also think there's an element of understanding how many of those non-negotiables are there, and can you see a long game in implementing a new system as your business grows versus trying to do it all out of
Right.
the chute. If I came to you and I said, Melvin, I have this business, it's growing, I have a few staff members. What's it going to take for me to switch from this basic accounting in my barrage of spreadsheets to an ERP with a fully integrated solution? What's that look like typically?
This is such a good question, and frankly, so difficult to give a universal answer to.
Right.
Um, we end up seeing a variation from one to the next, even for clients who are in the same industry. Uh, However, I think one of the things that patterns perhaps that emerge from thinking over the years and not so granularly of each individual implementation project, plan on it taking a little bit longer than you initially expect it might.
If-
And at the same time, definitely don't take on implementing portions of the software that are not, shall we say, relevant to the immediate daily operations of the business. Let's say that there are aspects of the business that require some kind of software development, what we call customizations.
Sure.
They're not needed for the core product to be implemented and run the operations of the business. It's these extensions to streamline things. There's a difference. If an extension is needed, if development is needed in order to go live with the new product, with the new ERP, then you have
Yep.
no choice. That has to be done. But any developments that can be, delayed for a phase 2, phase 3, or if the ERP offers products that you'd like to use, but they are not relevant to your daily operations, then to me, it makes sense to definitely delay those things. The reason I recommend that is because usually there is a period of time for data migration.
Yeah.
That is typically first. And the amount of time that takes is also a little hard to project because sometimes there are factors like working with the current provider,
Yep.
and sometimes that isn't the easiest process. Sometimes you may be responsible to try to harvest and get that data and to format it to the new ERP specs, and you're not, as familiar with data, and it just is time consuming. The second aspect to an implementation, typically after the data migration, I'll just loosely call it training. It's that period of time of getting your arms around the new program. And this is where you've got to get into the weeds. It's usually not the overall big picture strategies. It's usually in the weeds that they succeed or fail. And so getting in the weeds to get your arms around the products, kind of the way the product thinks. What a good ERP does, it forces clients and users to implement business processes.
Yeah. It's prescriptive.
It's prescriptive. Often, it's not uncommon for a small business to be coming from a program or a variety of tools that did not force that.
Sure.
It facilitated or encouraged ad hoc approaches to the use of its tools. A good ERP does not do that, in my opinion. It sort of guides users and clients and operations managers to implement often fairly strict processes. And I don't mean strict in the sense that they can't change or be flexible, but that's what brings the unity and predictability to the operations of a business, is for things to, this is how we do it, it's why we do it this way, these are the steps we follow, and we always follow these steps because it results in the order always being pulled at the right time in the warehouse or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, absolutely.
So kind of a long answer there, but if a project lead is not very familiar with their business, then this period of time is going to be stretching,
Yeah.
very stretching. So usually at the conclusion of that period of time, when the lead is both getting their arms around the program and the business and the processes that they need to implement, that period of time is the most ideal time to get buy-in and input from colleagues and people who are actually going to be using this product. So when you reach that point in time, what I call flip the switch, and you go live and you start using it for the daily operations, oftentimes project leads are not able to think about the phase 2 or phase 3 they'd like to get to in that period of time, as we sometimes think that they would. And it's because often there's questions coming up from within the organization that were not anticipated.
Right.
There's people who brushed aside the value of learning the new product until they're having to use it and they need to learn it. So that month or two is a good time to just plan to be available to colleagues and to take things across the finish line to get the daily operations functional with the new ERP. And only after that period of time, I think, is the right time to start thinking about and planning to any future initiatives that had been left on the table.
So I'm curious, what you've gone through that process, you went through a sales cycle, you made a decision, you're moving forward, you do all those steps, you get to the end of your implementation, you're a month or two out past your go live. How do I know it's been successful? What's the metric, or how can a company know that this is worth this decision, and how can they retrospectively have confidence on the other side? What's that look like in your mind?
In my mind, what that looks like is usually whatever the initial motivators were that caused somebody to start surfing the web or picking up the phone and looking for another ERP, inevitably, a month or two after go live, whoever that decision maker is to make the final decision on this is the product we're going with or we're going to do this or not, they inevitably know whether it was successful or not,
Yeah.
because those challenges that served as a prompting to them to start looking are either met or unmet. If the business challenge was too many tools in use, difficulty managing inventory, usually within a month or two after go live, and this is usually, by then that question is answered. So I guess what I am pointing to is those initial driving factors. Another factor unrelated to the initial motivations that led somebody to consider ERP can be the quality of the implementation.
Yeah.
It is possible to have the right ERP, the right set of tools, the right fit, and a weak implementation.
Mm-hmm.
There are different factors that can cause that. But one of the things that helps avoid that is what I referred to earlier of ownership.
Yeah.
Ownership leads the lead person to care about the details. It's ironic how many times things succeed or fail somewhere in the weeds.
Yeah. Let's talk about that for a minute. So we've got the big picture of the story arc of the implementation of an ERP, starting from discernment and what you need to get ready for it, to landing the plane and having some kind of measure of success. But in between, there's this whole implementation process. There's the data transfer, the training, and the go live, which is actually putting this ERP software to work. Who is the implementer versus, so you have the customer who's buying the software and the implementer is the guide. What is the roles? What are the expectations on those actors? Knowing that the implementer is often a team of one or more people helping guide that process, and the customer client is a decision maker, but often multiple people in the implementation, but what are the responsibilities of each of those? And what's the expectation of both of those parties in this project?
Great question, Dee. So I think that one of the misunderstandings that occur in the roles is sometimes a client, sometimes they're led to think this by a service provider,
Mhm.
and other times this is simply their assumption.
Mhm.
Service provider will somehow make this implementation successful. The reality is that the client side, like the project lead or the team on the client side, they are the ones who implement.
Mhm.
The service provider ought to be invaluable, meaning they ought to bring to the table training, and maybe it's data
Mhm.
migration services, whatever those things are, that are indispensable and of utmost importance and value. Another thing, that that is ideally the service provider brings to the table experience, meaning
Mhm.
experience with the ERP, you know, experience of, well, this is the ideal workflow because of the design of this feature and so forth. But the reality is that's all informational. Now, there's also often configuration. There may be configuration services that occur from the service provider on the client's behalf, configuring things to the best fit for their industry or business. But it is still never a case where the service provider actually implements, but it is the client who implements.
Yeah.
And I think that that little distinction is easily misunderstood, or even service providers accidentally mislead clients on.
Or maybe in some cases, uh, implementing the companies and the service providers in this case take on more than they should,
Yeah,
which can cause downstream negative knock-on
correct.
effects. I think the most common place where this shows up is data migration, right? Like early on, I've given you my data, just make it work,
Mhm.
happens. And what I think is really amazing, what's like the ideal in my mind is when customers take ownership of that data
Mhm.
and go through it. Like, so you get your customer list, your product list, your vendor list, and you're going through that. And they're actually like maybe striking out customers that are no longer customers or that they don't want to carry forward. They're going through their product list and we're actually taking a serious look at the stuff they have. And it's a lot of work. I mean, if you have a
Yeah.
40,000 SKUs in your company or 20,000 SKUs, that's a lot of data to process, but it's transformational when you're doing that hard reset or when you're
Mhm.
embarking a new thing just to take ownership. And then the other side of that is often just the open-minded approach that's really required, I think. And I'd be curious what you think about when you're giving feedback. So
Mhm.
I give you, Melvin, the service provider, my data. I basically dumped it out to you and you give me a bunch of feedback on things I need to do. And I think my response to that can go a long way in helping me understand how this tool is going to help me further in the future, even just with simply reviewing and massaging data.
That's a good point, Deke. Absolutely. Because, you think about on the client side, the project lead. So many times there are daily responsibilities that are knocking and at times difficult to step away from. What you were describing, for data, maybe 20,000 customers or 40,000 SKUs of products, and think of just how, you know, tedious and mind numbingly boring it is to try to dig through that.
Yeah.
That stuff actually matters. That's the level of granularity that a project lead will end up running into. And with any program, no matter what program it is, the quality of the output, like the reporting or data, is only as good as the input. And so each phase matters for sure. It's really helpful to a service provider for clients to take ownership. But then at the same time, it is really helpful to the personnel who are leading the implementation on the client side to find the right service provider. That is of equal importance because service providers have an obligation to fulfill their commitments,
Yeah.
to try to present things where expectations are set realistically, not just what sounds good,
Yeah.
but what's realistic. I don't know that implementations are made successful by the quality of data. However, if the attitude is to do whatever it takes, I've seen implementations where the data from the previous program just didn't cut it, and the lead spent 6 months manually creating records.
Mm.
Like that's the kind of commitment that sometimes ends up occurring. So, yeah,
I, I think it's important for our listeners to know that that's a rare occurrence.
no, that's a case where there simply was no ability to harvest any data and it all had to be created manually. So,
Yeah.
definitely an exception, or typically anyway.
I think the thing that is important for people to companies, listeners to understand is that the challenge that your consultant in this case has is not that they don't have opinions, not that they don't have advice. They want to guide you,
Mhm.
but they want to empower you to make decisions. And ultimately, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made in this process of implementing new software. So I think it's also appropriate for companies to expect that consultants ask good questions and also have
Yes.
responsible answers to questions.
Yes.
I think it's a reasonable expectation to hear you or other consultants with whatever company they might work with say, I don't know,
Right.
because sometimes we just don't.
There are many cases that consultants run into where they haven't had previous exposure or experience to particular use cases or scenarios. Just being honest and humble in those instances is of utmost importance. Very well said there.
Yeah, I think that's a character of the provider that customers should be looking for is it's an unreasonable expectation that any one person knows the full scope of any ERP product. ERPs are just way too big. A tell is if they are unwilling to acknowledge that reality and how tenacious they are in helping you figure out the
Yeah.
right path to find a solution. So change management is one of the things you've been like talking around, and I'll just name it.
Mhm.
And I guess the question for you, Melvin, is what are some encouragements or thoughts or recommendations you have for businesses to deal with this big challenge of setting up their team, preparing them for transition? What are things that you would encourage them to do either before, during, and after they're going through some kind of change to help them, yes, prepare, but also execute and then reflect and, in many ways, rinse and repeat as they continue to grow as a company?
My experience suggests that almost anyone will embrace any change if they are sufficiently read in to the value of the change. On one hand, I think change management immediately brings up the question of the overall health of an organization and the relational health of the organization that can be more difficult aspects to discuss and think about. But assuming the best, almost anyone will embrace any change if the value of the change can be articulated and identified, and the people be helped to understand who the change is benefiting or what the change is benefiting. That would be what my experience suggests.
Yeah, that's great. It seems like one of the things that comes to mind as you were articulating that reflection is that company leadership, your project leads, the owners, the leadership of the company, they have a big responsibility in a successful implementation, both from
Yeah.
the data management, getting the right people in the right room at the right time, making sure there's enough resources and space and
Mhm.
knowledge, but also just communicating
Yeah.
value of the why. Like, why are we doing this? Why does it matter? And also probably transparency and honesty that
Yeah.
change doesn't necessarily translate into easier. It might simply just be
Correct.
different, but there's things we actually have to do to make it change. And that's part of being read in is that it's
Right.
it we're actually gonna disrupt this thing that you're doing and we're gonna change it to something else. And there's trade-offs along the way, but that if there's a clear value proposition there, then that's
Yeah.
probably palatable or even exciting. And that's
Yeah.
even greater.
Good one on the part of it being exciting, because if I encourage, to the extent that it's possible, I encourage specifics and details, like to the extent that it's appropriate in describing the value of the change. In other words, if I present to you something to change in the organization and I simply provide you a high level philosophical that it benefits the organization, that is not very meaningful to
Mhm.
you. It's much more meaningful if I articulate and I explain that actually by doing this, you know, this segment of customers are going to experience whatever it is that we are after by you doing this extra thing in your day.
Yeah.
In other words, I know there's not much specifics in what I just shared, but I'm just trying to make a point to identify the specific value proposition. It just helps a lot. It makes it much more likely that that particular change is embraced and not a burden.
Some like examples of where this shows up, I think some things come to mind is I'm a service tech who normally gets a piece of paper. I scribble down what inventory I consumed and what I did on a piece of paper, and then somebody else has to interpret my chicken scratch
Yeah.
into an order. The change for me as a technician might simply be using a computer terminal and in real time
Mhm.
recording my inventory, um, and in real time recording my service hours or the labor codes that I'm engaging in on a service task or work order. And what that does for the company is more accurate billing, more accurate inventory management, greater certainty that parts will be available for me to work on customers' projects, but also better cost management, all of these things that play into just simply getting the right information in the right place at an appropriate
Precisely.
speed.
Precisely. And I like that specific examples that you were sharing because, in the world of inventory, assuming that a lot of our listeners might be dealing with inventory, what can be viewed as a burden of recording at the time something's pulled from the shelf that it was in fact pulled from the shelf, the moment you begin to understand why that isn't a burden and the reason that that's valuable is maybe when you start to understand that by me doing that makes it possible for anyone in the organization to check, not go walk to the shelf to see what we have, but to be able to see in the system how many are on the shelf and to
Mhm.
rely on that number. And not only that, but immediately the buyer or the person responsible to reorder, if they can order a day earlier or a week earlier because their inventory levels are accurate and they know they're accurate and they can rely on it being accurate, there's less outages on the
Mhm.
shelf of those products. There's less customers that you may have to talk to that are, a little myth that you ran out of this product again. It's just that level of detail at
Yeah.
the times that it's possible to articulate the value of why we're asking you to do the things that we're doing, especially, when it's a change to what somebody was used to. Maybe they were hired in, and at the time that they were hired in, it's just, you pull orders all day and you sign out, and that's it at the end of the day. And now we're introducing what feels like the additional step of not only are you pulling orders, but you're, you know,
Mhm.
recording what you're pulling at the time you're pulling it. And it's not that much more work, but it just feels a little burdensome. So just bringing the value of why the change can make such a difference in the long run. So
Yeah,
change management, it's important.
I think, and we can talk about this a little bit later as we dive into the post-implementation. What do we do after? But I also feel like that's when you get that positive flywheel
Right.
of open-mindedness, embracing change, looking for opportunities to increase value for customers and your peers in the workplace. You also start looking for how to maximize tools and do even more creative stuff that brings efficiency, value to customers, which is really interesting. So
Yeah.
Melvin, you still implement customers every day, which is fun, exciting work. I'm curious, what comes to mind as one of your best implementations you've been part of? And what makes it a great implementation?
Oh boy. So I have had many wonderful opportunities and, credit to colleagues and clients for those opportunities. A lot of them that I sort of think of as the ones I really enjoyed, they always involve client leads who take ownership and they do whatever it takes. It certainly doesn't mean that we on our side don't have and didn't have a responsibility to show up and also go the second mile. But being able to convey to a client both the services we commit to, data migration and training, and to see a client absorb that and retain it and implement at their business this tool, and to be able to see that take off. And then, several years later, things are flourishing. Like that is just, that's why we do what we do.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
What are some red flags? If I'm a company, I'm implementing things. What are some things that if they show up, I should be weary of, or I should be mindful that it's going off track?
As far as an implementation is going off track.
Yeah.
Yeah. So big thing would be if there are key milestones that are understood to be measurements of where the
Mhm.
project is at. If, you know, anyone who lives in the implementation space knows how easy it is for milestones to be missed and for things to get a little bit off track. But if they are not only slightly missed, but maybe repeatedly missed or
Mm.
fundamentally missed. And the milestones can be, in our world, they're often dates.
Yeah.
We hope to be at this phase or stage by this date, this phase or stage by this date, this phase or stage. Uh, Flexibility is needed and is good because I tend to tell colleagues, it's not really a matter of if hiccups come up, hiccups will come up. Each implementation will have something that comes up. But if training is not sticking
Mhm.
and we are approaching a month before go live and it's looking like our trajectory is not heading in the right direction, those things are always difficult to address and know how to navigate, but things always have a way of working out if you can just find a way to address it.
Yeah. Seems like one of the things that I would keep in mind if I were a client or advising, if I heard a customer say, we keep missing these deadlines, I'm not really too sure if they're valuable, is to simply ask. Ask the consultant, communicate if there's an expectation that you have that isn't being, that letting it fester is never the answer, naming it.
Correct.
And then also being open-minded to feedback and asking your consultant what you could be doing to better accelerate or better learn, or if you need a different tactic, a different resource, asking for
Mhm.
it. Don't just assume, like, so if I give you a lecture every day and you're just like, I need a video, ask for the
Mhm.
things you need that will
Yeah.
help you be successful. I suspect you would agree with is that it is better to delay go live if you're not ready, if it's actually not there, than to go live and have to revert.
Yeah.
Not good to delay go live because you don't know 100% because you never will.
Correct. Very true. I know, with everything that you're saying there, we're kind of talking out of two sides of our mouth, but it's true. It's never a case where you arrive at go live knowing everything there is to know.
Yeah.
but it's also not a case where you can go live without the fundamentals in place.
Right.
And it's typically there that a client lead may have to rely on their consultant a bit to navigate what those are.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
those core business operations, right? If you can't do those core business
Correct.
operations, pump the brakes. If you
Yep.
can, you'll probably be fine. I think the thing, at least for us at Koble, the thing that highlight is that we do partnership. So we're along for the ride. We're there to help you when we bring that resource along with you. So,
Absolutely.
and that's something to probably look for. So I want to keep us moving to the post-implementation phase. So as we're talking about the story arc of implementation, we have the data entry and migration, we have the training implementation, and we have this post-implementation. You kind of articulated earlier about how companies can think about what's successful, and it's largely the goals on the front end. Are the needs you articulated there, are they being met here? Once the ERP is live, what are those things that they should be focusing on? Like, okay, we've gone live. What next? What do you need to think about? Where should your gaze go into the future?
So if you're thinking, after go live, the dust has settled, the waters are smooth, in terms of operationally, things are clicking, software's in use in all the different facets of the business. Where my mind tends to go to your question, Deke, is the single word I would use is optimization. I think any ERP has a lot of clients probably that they care about their core business functions being met well with their ERP program. And that's as far as they envision going with ERP. And if that's you as a listener, that's perfectly fine. That's okay. But don't ever forget to consider the possibility that there could be aspects of the business that could be optimized,
Yeah.
automated, maybe invest in some extensions or some customizations that maybe bring a streamlining effect. Maybe there's more data that you need at your visual fingertips at point of sale or a shop technician, whatever the case may be, consider investing in those things. And in my opinion, organizations do well to think about ERP as communicating with each other through ERP. In other words, if you can add, whether it's data or settings or fields or flows, like automated flows within an ERP that tell other people in the organization what they need to know without them having to text you or come find you, absolutely go after those things.
Yeah.
Just go after it. Sometimes, you run into costs and you have to calibrate the ROI and delay investing in something until it makes more sense. We understand all of that. But just because you think your business is average doesn't mean you shouldn't think about optimization and be open-minded to the possibility that there's something in your business that could be optimized. The other thing that I think about is no ERP is going to have all the data visualization and reporting that you might wish for or would find useful. And if ERP has a pathway or a way to get more out of the data you have, that is a phenomenal place to invest as well.
Yeah. Great. All right. I want to do a couple of rapid fire kind of questions as we're closing out, because I think these are the demand and answer, but they're the things that I think are probably answered in some of the conversation we've already had. And this one, I think we could answer the same way is, what advice do you have for a business that doesn't feel like their ERP software is delivering the value they expected?
So find out if your expectations were unrealistic, or find out if your expectations are realistic and you are not using the software to its potential. There's a big difference. If your expectations were in the wrong place and your software cannot get there, then it's just a time to reevaluate and assess, basically. I referred to optimizations and extensions and customizations. Sometimes that's the gap. But there are other times when programs can meet the needs.
Hmm.
Expectations were not in the wrong place, but not enough time has been spent in the weeds of this is how the program functions, what it
Right.
does. You can't implement something you don't know how it works. You
Right.
first need to learn how it works to bring to fruition that good software operational stuff that you were after.
Yeah. It also is a telltale sign. If you implemented the software, you're excited, it's working, it's doing the things you expected, time goes by, and you're now feeling like it's not taking you where you need to go, that's probably a telltale sign you're actually up for another phase. It's almost like embarking on another sub implementation because there's likely
Correct.
another level of the software where there's more tools, or there's just new modules or extensions and customizations are another great example, but where it's it's often not the tool necessarily as much as adding more stuff to your toolbox
Mhm.
within the container that you're in. We hear customers that, hey, I need your software to do this or that.
Mhm.
And the answer is, oh, it does. And they're like, wait, it does? And it's just like the distance between the implementation, the
Correct.
problem set has changed, and now it's time to take another look.
Well said. Absolutely. Yes.
Another question I think is important for people listening to this. So if you're a company who doesn't use ERP,
Mhm.
you're using basic accounting software, or maybe enterprise, but it's just accounting software. Maybe you have spreadsheets or what have you, but you're not using ERP. You don't have this integrated ecosystem for business management. What advice would you have for that company?
My instinct tends to be a little bit this way. First of all, are you sure you're not ready for it? Do you anticipate some future growth? Are
Hmm.
you or your staff doing quite a bit of double entry that maybe is taking up some time that, could be just as useful somewhere else? The thing I think that is often kind of especially a small business, that's not used to the ERP rates so much as the less expensive packages out there. Often the cost tends to be a little bit of a wall, kind of. It's kind of viewed as a wall. And certainly, each business, each organization needs to assess for themselves. But a good ERP, if you have business growth, or if you are paying for some time that goes into double entry, or you're paying an accountant for some services you could have a software do for you by bringing it in-house. Sometimes if the cost of those things were compiled and put together, a business owner's eyes would open in a little bit of surprise at
Mm.
redirecting those funds into just one ERP platform for the entire business. The other thing that I would suggest is good ERP is about equivalent in what it does for an organization to a person.
Yeah.
All organizations need CPAs and accountants. But if you are paying for bookkeeping services that an ERP can do for you by bringing those processes together, or if you are losing sales, maybe not so much in the literal sense where you can point to a
Mhm.
sale you lost because you were out of inventory, but you are feeding a marketplace perception that your inventory is not managed well,
Mhm.
consider ERP.
That's great. A last implementation related question is when you're choosing your software partner, as you're going on this journey as a company
Mhm.
owner, what advice would you give a company to look for? Like what makes a good software partner versus the alternatives?
Kind of hard to choose just one factor. My instinct tends to be to point toward trust. If you think of all the different options, if you're met with someone in the marketplace and they are able to bring specific, whether it's demos or answers to questions, and you feel like they are able to sort of perceive and get their arms
Hmm.
around your business, the operations and all these different things, trust is huge
Yeah.
for the long term relationship.
Yeah, that's great. We're coming to our end. Thank you, Melvin. As always, it's a pleasure to work with you as we share the vision of helping organizations and individuals flourish, which is the mission of Koble Systems. To learn more about how we can help your business take growth to the next stage or bring clarity and transparency to your business process, give us a call at 717-442-3247 or visit our website, koblesystems.com. We'd love to partner with you and help you achieve your business goals and serve your customers well. Thanks,
Thank
Melvin.
you for having me, Deke. Much appreciated.